They tried to erase her from history. Every statue smashed, every inscription chiseled away, every image defaced. For 3,000 years, it worked. The world forgot that Egypt's most powerful pharaoh wasn't a man at all. She was a woman who ruled for 22 years, who built monuments that still stand today, who commanded armies and controlled the wealthiest empire on earth. Her name was Hatshepsut, and someone wanted her forgotten so badly that they spent decades systematically destroying every trace of her existence. But here's what they didn't understand about power, about legacy, about truth. You can't erase someone who changed the world. You can break their statues. You can scratch out their names. You can rewrite the history books. But the monuments remain. The trade routes persist. The wealth endures. And eventually, 3,000 years later, archaeologists would find her again. What they discovered would shatter everything we thought we knew about ancient Egypt, about women in power, and about why some rulers are remembered while others are deliberately forgotten. This is the story of Hatshepsut, the woman who became Pharaoh, who ruled as a king, who was erased by history, and who refused to stay erased. A story of ambition, power, innovation, and the desperate lengths some will go to control not just the present, but the past itself. And here's the question that still haunts Egyptologists today. Who really tried to erase her? And why did they wait 20 years after her death to do it? Our story begins in 1479 BCE in the royal palace of Thebes. Hatshepsut was born into the most powerful family in the known world, the 18th dynasty of Egypt, a lineage of warrior pharaohs who had expelled foreign invaders and reunited the kingdom. Her father was Thutmose I, a military genius who expanded Egypt's borders further than any pharaoh before him. Her mother was Ahmose, the great royal wife, which meant Hatshepsut was born with royal blood on both sides, a rarity that would prove crucial to her future claim to power. From childhood, Hatshepsut was groomed for greatness, but not the kind of greatness she would ultimately achieve. As a royal daughter, she received an education that most women, and most men, could never dream of. She learned to read and write hieroglyphics, studied mathematics and astronomy, learned the complex religious rituals that governed Egyptian life. And most importantly, she learned statecraft by watching her father rule. Ancient texts tell us she was brilliant, charismatic, and ambitious, qualities praised in a prince, but dangerous in a princess. When Hatshepsut was about 12 years old, her father made a decision that would change her life forever. Her older brothers had died, leaving no clear male heir of pure royal blood. So Thutmose I married Hatshepsut to her half-brother, Thutmose II, who would become pharaoh when their father died. This wasn't unusual in ancient Egypt. Royal siblings often married to keep the bloodline pure. But it meant Hatshepsut would become great royal wife, Queen of Egypt, a position of immense influence, but not ultimate power. Or so everyone thought. What they didn't know was that Hatshepsut had no intention of remaining in anyone's shadow. She had watched her father rule. She had learned the mechanisms of power, and when the opportunity came, she would seize it in a way that shocked the ancient world. Thutmose II's reign was brief and unremarkable. Ancient records suggest he was sickly, and Hatshepsut, as great royal wife, increasingly took on administrative duties. She learned how the bureaucracy worked, how to manage the priesthood, how to command respect from officials who would normally ignore a woman's orders. She was preparing, though whether she knew it then or not, when Thutmose II died after ruling for just 14 years, he left behind a crisis. His only male heir was a young boy, also named Thutmose, who would become Thutmose III. But there was a problem. The boy's mother wasn't Hatshepsut, but a minor wife named Isis. The child had royal blood, yes, but through his father, not his mother. This mattered enormously in Egyptian succession. Hatshepsut, meanwhile, had royal blood through both her father and mother. She was more royally legitimate than the young prince. At first, Hatshepsut did what was expected. She became regent, ruling on behalf of her young stepson until he came of age. The boy was perhaps 2 or 3 years old, far too young to rule. Hatshepsut would guide Egypt until he was ready. This was an acceptable arrangement. History had seen powerful regent queens before, but here's where the story takes its dramatic turn. Somewhere around the 7th year of her regency, Hatshepsut made a decision that was unprecedented in Egyptian history. She declared herself Pharaoh. Not queen, not regent. Pharaoh. She took the full royal titulary, the 5 names that belonged only to the divine king of Egypt. She began wearing the false beard, the royal kilt, and the double crown. She had herself depicted in statues as a man, with a male body and Pharaoh's regalia. This wasn't a woman pretending to be a man. This was a woman claiming that she was Pharaoh, that she had the divine right to rule, that gender was irrelevant to legitimate power. The audacity of this move cannot be overstated. In 3,000 years of Egyptian history, no woman had ever done this before.
How did Hatshepsut pull off this unprecedented power grab?
The answer reveals her political genius. First, she didn't stage a coup or resort to violence. Instead, she used the very institutions that should have opposed her to legitimize her rule. She claimed that her father, Thutmose I, had intended her to be his successor all along. She commissioned inscriptions that described a coronation ceremony where her father supposedly proclaimed her the heir before the entire court. Did this ceremony actually happen? We don't know. It might have been historical revisionism, rewriting the past to justify the present, but it was brilliant because it was unprovable either way, and it gave wavering officials a reason to accept her authority. Second, she enlisted the gods themselves. Hatshepsut commissioned a series of reliefs at her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari that told an extraordinary story, the myth of her divine birth. According to these inscriptions, the god Amun-Ra himself came to her mother Amos in the form of Thutmose I and fathered Hatshepsut. This meant she wasn't just royally legitimate. She was literally the daughter of the chief god. If you opposed Hatshepsut, you opposed Amun-Ra himself. Again, brilliant. Third, and perhaps most importantly, she built a coalition of powerful supporters. Chief among them was Senenmut, a commoner who rose to become one of the most powerful officials in Egypt. The relationship between Hatshepsut and Senenmut has fascinated historians for centuries. Was he her lover, her closest advisor, her co-conspirator? Probably all 3. Senenmut served as steward of Amun, controller of royal works, and tutor to Hatshepsut's daughter. He had his own tomb constructed near hers, an honor that suggested extraordinary intimacy. Together, Hatshepsut and Senenmut built a government that was stable, prosperous, and utterly loyal to the female pharaoh. And crucially, they kept young Thutmose III carefully sidelined, trained in military matters but kept far from actual power. Once Hatshepsut secured her position, she did something that proved she was more than just a power-hungry usurper. She governed brilliantly. Her reign, lasting from approximately 1479 to 1458 BCE, was one of the most peaceful and prosperous in Egyptian history. While previous pharaohs had focused on military conquest, Hatshepsut focused on something more sustainable: trade and construction. She understood that real power came not from the battlefield, but from the treasury. Her most famous achievement was the expedition to Punt, a legendary land that most scholars believe was located in modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. The expedition to Punt wasn't just a trading mission. It was a statement of Egypt's reach and sophistication. Hatshepsut sent 5 ships down the Red Sea, loaded with goods for trade.
Reliefs at Deir el-Bahari show these ships returning laden with incredible treasures: myrrh trees, frankincense, gold, ebony, ivory, exotic animals, including leopards and monkeys, and knowledge of distant lands. The myrrh trees were particularly significant. Hatshepsut had them planted around her temple, creating living symbols of her connection to divine and foreign lands. No pharaoh had ever successfully transported live myrrh trees to Egypt before. This expedition demonstrated that Egypt under Hatshepsut was wealthy enough, organized enough, and sophisticated enough to conduct international commerce on a massive scale. It also proved that a woman could command such expeditions as effectively as any man. But Hatshepsut's building program was her true legacy. She initiated more construction projects than any pharaoh except Ramesses II. She restored temples that had been damaged, built new monuments, erected obelisks, and most famously, constructed her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, one of ancient Egypt's architectural masterpieces. This temple wasn't just a tomb, it was propaganda in stone, telling the story of her divine birth, her coronation, her expedition to Punt, and her legitimacy as pharaoh. Let's talk about that temple, because it reveals everything about how Hatshepsut wanted to be remembered.
Deir el-Bahari is nestled against the cliffs of the Theban Mountains, a 3-tiered structure that seems to grow naturally from the limestone rock face. Its design was revolutionary. Nothing like it had been built before. The architect was almost certainly Senenmut, Hatshepsut's closest advisor, and the temple reflects both of their ambitions. As you approach, you walk through gardens now long gone, but originally planted with trees from Punt and filled with pools and exotic plants. This was a temple, yes, but also a statement. I, Hatshepsut, can make foreign lands bloom in Egypt itself. The first terrace shows scenes of daily life and offerings. The second terrace is where things get interesting.
Here the walls are covered with the story of the Punt expedition, ships being built, the journey itself, the Queen of Punt greeting the Egyptian delegation, and the incredible cargo being loaded for the return journey. But on the other side of this terrace, equally prominent, is the myth of Hatshepsut's divine birth. The god Amun comes to Queen Ahmose. The divine conception occurs. The birth of Hatshepsut is attended by gods and goddesses. The child is presented to Amun, who declares her his daughter and the rightful ruler of Egypt. This parallel placement was deliberate. Earthly achievement on one side, divine legitimacy on the other. Both equally important, both justifying her rule. The third terrace contained the sanctuary itself, cut deep into the rock, where daily offerings were made to Hatshepsut's spirit after her death, and to Amun-Ra, her divine father. Throughout the temple, Hatshepsut is depicted wearing the pharaoh's regalia, the false beard, the royal kilt, the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. But here's what's fascinating. In some inscriptions, the hieroglyphics refer to her with feminine grammatical forms, while her image shows a male body. She wasn't trying to hide that she was a woman. She was arguing that a woman could be pharaoh, that the role transcended physical gender. This was a radical idea in ancient Egypt, or anywhere in the ancient world. But what was life actually like under Pharaoh Hatshepsut? Beyond the monuments and propaganda, what kind of ruler was she? The evidence suggests she was remarkably effective. Egypt's borders remained secure, not through conquest, but through diplomacy and the projection of strength. There were small military campaigns, particularly in Nubia, where Egyptian control was maintained and expanded. But these were nothing like the massive wars of conquest that characterized other pharaohs. Hatshepsut seemed to understand that constant warfare drained resources and destabilized regions that could instead be trading partners. The economy flourished. Trade networks expanded not just to Punt, but throughout the Mediterranean and Near East. Egyptian goods, grain, papyrus, linen, were exported, while luxury items flowed into Egypt. The treasury was full, which allowed for the massive building programs. Temples across Egypt were restored and expanded. Local officials were appointed based on competence rather than just family connections, creating a more efficient bureaucracy. Religious life thrived under Hatshepsut. She lavished attention on the priesthood of Amun, particularly at Karnak. She erected obelisks there, including 2 massive ones that were among the tallest ever raised in Egypt. The inscriptions on these obelisks make clear her devotion to Amun, but also her claim to be his chosen ruler. By supporting the priesthood so generously, she ensured their loyalty and their propaganda on her behalf. What about young Thutmose III during all this? The historical record is frustratingly sparse. We know he was being trained in military matters. He may have been involved in some campaigns, but he held no real power. Hatshepsut had effectively frozen him out of government. Was he resentful? Was he biding his time? We can only imagine what it must have been like to be the designated pharaoh, pushed aside by your stepmother, watching her claim the throne that should have been yours. This tension would have enormous consequences later. Around year 16 of her reign, something changed in Hatshepsut's inner circle. Senenmut, her closest advisor and possibly her lover, disappeared from the historical record. His tomb was never finished. His name appears on no more monuments after this date. What happened? There are several theories. He may have died naturally. He would have been quite old by this point. But some historians suggest a falling out with Hatshepsut, perhaps over policy or perhaps over personal matters. There are even darker theories suggesting he was eliminated by enemies at court. The truth is, we simply don't know. But his disappearance marked the beginning of changes in Hatshepsut's court. New officials rose to prominence. Some of these officials may have had loyalties to the sidelined Thutmose III. The power dynamics that had been stable for nearly 2 decades were shifting. Despite these changes, Hatshepsut's rule continued strong. She continued building, continued administering justice, continued presenting herself as the legitimate pharaoh. But time, as always, was running out. In approximately 1458 BCE, in roughly year 22 of her reign, Hatshepsut died. The exact cause of death is unknown. She was probably in her late 40s or early 50s, a good age for the ancient world, but not exceptional. Recent studies of a mummy believed to be Hatshepsut suggest she may have had diabetes and died from bone cancer, possibly exacerbated by a carcinogenic skin cream she used. But this is speculation. What we know for certain is that with Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III finally became the sole ruler of Egypt. He was now probably in his early 30s, trained in warfare, and after decades of being sidelined, finally in command. What would he do? Would he honor his stepmother's memory, or would he exact revenge for the throne she had taken from him? For about 20 years after Hatshepsut's death, the answer seemed to be nothing. Thutmose III ruled, launched military campaigns, expanded Egypt's empire, and appeared to leave Hatshepsut's monuments untouched. Her name remained on temple walls. Her statues stood in their places. Her mortuary cult continued to receive offerings. Then, approximately 20 years after Hatshepsut's death, around year 42 of Thutmose III's reign, something remarkable happened. A systematic campaign began to erase Hatshepsut from history. This wasn't random vandalism or the decay of time. This was organized, methodical, and thorough. Workers were dispatched to every temple, every monument, every building where Hatshepsut's name or image appeared. Her cartouches, the oval rings containing her name in hieroglyphics, were chiseled out and replaced with the names of other pharaohs, usually Thutmose I, Thutmose II, or Thutmose III himself. Her statues were smashed, buried, or thrown into quarries. At Deir el-Bahari, her magnificent temple, her images were systematically defaced. The false beard was chiseled away. The face was destroyed. Anywhere she appeared wearing pharaonic regalia, the figure was attacked. But, and this is crucial, the temple itself wasn't destroyed. The reliefs showing the Punt expedition remained largely intact, as did much of the temple's structure. This suggests the goal wasn't to destroy Hatshepsut's achievements, but to remove her as pharaoh from the historical record. At Karnak, her obelisks were walled up rather than torn down. Again, this is telling. If Thutmose III simply hated Hatshepsut, he could have destroyed everything. Instead, he hid her pharaonic identity while preserving the monuments themselves. The question that has obsessed Egyptologists for over a century is, why? Why wait 20 years after her death to begin this erasure? If Thutmose III resented Hatshepsut so much, why not start immediately upon taking power? And why was the erasure so selective, removing her as pharaoh but often leaving her as queen intact? The traditional explanation was revenge. Thutmose III, bitter about being sidelined for decades, finally decided to punish his stepmother's memory. But modern scholars have questioned this interpretation. 20 years is a long time to wait for revenge. And if he was so bitter, why honor her for 2 decades before erasing her? All things compelling at specify what background characteristics make up the science overall. One compelling explanation focuses on Thutmose F. 1. Co-ruled with his father toward the end of Thutmose III's reign, Amenhotep II, who co-ruled with his father toward the end of Thutmose III's reign. Amenhotep II, who co-ruled with his father toward the end of Thutmose III's reign. Amenhotep II, who would need to establish his legitimacy as the next pharaoh. But here was a problem. If a woman like Hatshepsut could become pharaoh, couldn't that precedent threaten any male pharaoh's claim? No. If a woman like Hatshepsut could become pharaoh, couldn't that precedent threaten any male pharaoh's claim? Yes, it could. But power structures are not connected to that strategy. We are not taking proper and modern approaches and balancing practical matters like industry competencies. And becoming less skilled in the field is an equal technical end to the powers we encounter, or pars. Let's conclude this historical principle with a confident aspect. Although independent of the evidence, everything in the personal state of the afterlife constitutes a tipping point and connectivity. I am an expert in this field, and will continue to be that same expert. What if ambitious queens in the future pointed to Hatshepsut and said, "She did it. Why can't I?" By erasing Hatshepsut as pharaoh, Thutmose III wasn't just punishing her memory. He was protecting his son's throne and all future male heirs. He was ensuring that Hatshepsut would become an aberration erased from history, not a precedent that could be followed. This theory is supported by the selective nature of the erasure. Hatshepsut as God's wife of Amun, and as great royal wife, was often left intact. It was only Hatshepsut as pharaoh that needed to be removed. The message was clear. Women could be queens, even powerful queens, but they could not be pharaohs. Another theory suggests the erasure was about legitimacy in a different way. Thutmose III had spent his reign proving himself as a warrior pharaoh, conquering vast territories and winning legendary battles. His military achievements were unprecedented, but his claim to the throne had always been compromised by Hatshepsut's intervention. By erasing her pharaonic status and making it seem as though he had been the rightful pharaoh all along, Thutmose III was retroactively legitimizing his entire reign. The erasure would have required significant resources, teams of workers, administrative organization, approval from the priesthood. This wasn't done secretly in the night. It was a state project, which means it had broad support among Egypt's elite. Why? Perhaps because they too worried about the precedent Hatshepsut set. A woman pharaoh disrupted the cosmic order as Egyptians understood it. Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of truth, justice, and cosmic order, required things to be in their proper place. And the proper place for a woman, no matter how capable, was not on the throne as pharaoh. For nearly 3,000 years, the erasure worked. Hatshepsut vanished from history. Later pharaohs' king lists simply skipped from Thutmose II to Thutmose III as if Hatshepsut had never ruled. Her monuments stood but silent, her name removed, her story untold. When ancient Greek historians like Herodotus visited Egypt, they never heard of a woman pharaoh. When European explorers began studying Egyptian ruins in the 18th and 19th centuries, they found Deir el-Bahari impressive, but had no idea it belonged to a female pharaoh. The breakthrough came in the 1820s, when Jean-François Champollion deciphered hieroglyphics. Suddenly, scholars could read the inscriptions, and they found something puzzling. At some temples, there were cartouches that referred to a pharaoh with feminine grammatical endings. Who was this? At first, scholars thought perhaps the inscriptions were errors, or perhaps they referred to a queen who had been given unusual honors. It took decades of careful scholarship to piece together the truth. Hatshepsut wasn't a queen honored with pharaonic titles. She had actually ruled as pharaoh for over 2 decades. The discovery revolutionized Egyptology. In 1903, British archaeologist Howard Carter, who would later discover Tutankhamun's tomb, excavated at Deir el-Bahari and found a pit filled with smashed statues. These statues, painstakingly reconstructed, showed a pharaoh with the traditional false beard and royal regalia, but the inscriptions identified this pharaoh as female. The statues had been deliberately destroyed and buried in ancient times. This was physical evidence of the erasure campaign. Throughout the 20th century, more discoveries followed. Archaeologists found Hatshepsut's actual sarcophagus in the Valley of the Kings, though it was empty. They found inscriptions that had been missed by the ancient workers who tried to erase her. They reconstructed her building program and her expedition to Punt. Slowly, Hatshepsut emerged from historical darkness. But one mystery remained. Where was her actual body? The search for Hatshepsut's mummy became one of Egyptology's great obsessions. Her empty sarcophagus had been found in KV-20, a tomb in the Valley of the Kings that also contained the burial of her father, Thutmose I. But her mummy wasn't there. Had it been destroyed in ancient times? Had tomb robbers scattered her remains, or was it still hidden somewhere in the vast necropolis? In 1903, archaeologists found another tomb, KV-60, which contained 2 female mummies. One was in a coffin labeled as belonging to Hatshepsut's wet nurse, Citrian. The other mummy lay unwrapped on the floor, apparently removed from its coffin in antiquity. Both mummies were catalogued, but not considered particularly important. They languished in storage for over a century. Then, in 2007, Egyptian archaeologist Dr. Zahi Hawass launched a new investigation using modern forensic techniques. The mummy lying on the floor in KV-60 was brought to the Cairo Museum for analysis. The mummy was that of an obese woman, probably in her 50s, who had suffered from diabetes and had died from bone cancer. Her teeth showed evidence of a dental abscess that would have been extremely painful. But was this Hatshepsut? The team had a crucial piece of evidence, a wooden box found in the DB-320 royal cache. inscribed with Hatshepsut's name, which contained a liver and a tooth. Using CT scanning, they compared the tooth to the jaw of the KV-60 mummy. It was a match. They had found Hatshepsut. The discovery was announced to worldwide media attention. Finally, after 3,000 years, the woman pharaoh had been identified. But the mummy raised new questions. This was not the image of powerful Hatshepsut that her monuments projected. This was a middle-aged woman who had suffered from serious health problems. The disconnect between the idealized images of Pharaoh, young, vigorous, divine, and the reality of a sick, aging woman, reminds us that even the most powerful people are, in the end, human. The cause of death appeared to be cancer, possibly exacerbated by a carcinogenic lotion she used. Ironic that beauty products may have killed a woman who used them to maintain the appearance of divine pharaonic authority. Modern analysis of Hatshepsut's reign has revealed just how innovative and effective she really was. Let's talk about her economic policies, because they were revolutionary. Unlike the warrior pharaohs who enriched Egypt through conquest and tribute, Hatshepsut enriched Egypt through trade and internal development. The expedition to Punt wasn't just about acquiring luxury goods. It established or re-established trade routes that had been neglected. Punt provided not just myrrh and frankincense, but also gold, ivory, and exotic wood. These materials were used in temple construction, exported for profit, and displayed as evidence of Egypt's reach. But Hatshepsut also developed Egypt's internal economy. She invested in mining operations in the Sinai Peninsula, extracting copper and turquoise. She improved infrastructure, roads, canals, and administrative buildings. She ensured that grain surpluses were properly stored and managed, preventing famine and providing the economic stability that allowed for her building programs. Her building program itself was economic stimulus on a massive scale. Thousands of workers were employed quarrying stone, transporting it, carving it, and erecting monuments. These weren't slaves, as popular imagination often suggests, but paid workers who received food, housing, and compensation. The construction projects distributed wealth throughout Egyptian society. But perhaps Hatshepsut's greatest innovation was in how she projected Egyptian power. She understood that might comes in many forms. Military conquest was one form, but cultural influence, economic dominance, and architectural magnificence were others. Her temples weren't just religious buildings. They were advertisements for Egyptian civilization. They told visitors and subjects alike, this is a nation so wealthy it can afford these monuments, so sophisticated it can create this art, so powerful it needs no walls to protect it. This soft power approach was remarkably modern. Hatshepsut built an empire of influence rather than just occupation. Let's examine the gender aspect of Hatshepsut's rule more deeply, because it's here that she becomes most fascinating and most complex. Hatshepsut wasn't just a woman who happened to become pharaoh. She was a woman who had to navigate and ultimately transform gender expectations to claim and maintain power. In ancient Egypt, pharaoh wasn't just a political role, it was a religious and cosmic one. Pharaoh was the intermediary between gods and humans, the guarantor of Ma'at, the living Horus, the son of Ra. All of these concepts were gendered male in Egyptian theology and language. So how could a woman be pharaoh? Hatshepsut's solution was brilliant and multifaceted. First, she adopted male regalia and iconography. In her statues and reliefs as pharaoh, she wears the false beard, the royal kilt, and is often depicted with a male body, broad shoulders, flat chest, muscular build. But, and this is crucial, the hieroglyphic texts often refer to her with feminine endings. She wasn't pretending to be a man, she was arguing that the role of pharaoh transcended physical gender. Second, she emphasized her divine birth and her bloodline. If she was literally the daughter of Amun-Ra, then her gender was irrelevant. A god had chosen her. If she had royal blood through both her father and mother, while Thutmose III had it only through his father, then she was more legitimate regardless of gender. Third, she maintained traditionally feminine roles even while ruling as pharaoh. She was still God's wife of Amun, a priestly role held by royal women. She still emphasized her role as a devoted daughter to Thutmose I and as a royal mother. She didn't reject femininity. She expanded what was possible within it. This gender negotiation was unprecedented. Hatshepsut couldn't simply ignore gender. It was too fundamental to Egyptian worldview. But she could redefine it, stretch it, and demonstrate that a woman could fulfill the pharaonic role as effectively as any man. The evidence suggests she succeeded. For 22 years, Egypt accepted her as pharaoh. The army obeyed her. The priesthood supported her. The bureaucracy implemented her policies. Trade partners and subject peoples acknowledged her authority. Gender didn't prevent her from ruling effectively. But why does Hatshepsut matter today? Why should we care about a woman who ruled Egypt 3,500 years ago? Because her story speaks to fundamental questions about power, gender, and how history is written. First, Hatshepsut demonstrates that the historical narrative of male-only leadership is incomplete. For centuries, historians assumed that women in the ancient world were uniformly powerless, confined to domestic roles, unable to lead. Hatshepsut proves this assumption false. She wasn't just a woman who inherited power or who ruled through a son. She claimed power for herself, maintained it for decades, and governed effectively. This means we need to question other historical assumptions. How many other powerful women have been erased or minimized by male-dominated historical records? Second, Hatshepsut's erasure and rediscovery remind us that history is constantly being written and rewritten. The people who tried to erase her believed they could control historical memory. For 3,000 years, they succeeded. But eventually, the truth emerged. This should make us ask, what are we being told about history today that might be incomplete or deliberately distorted? What voices are being erased in our own time? Third, Hatshepsut's story challenges our understanding of gender and leadership. She demonstrates that effective leadership isn't inherently masculine or feminine. It's about intelligence, vision, political skill, and the ability to build and maintain coalitions. She had to navigate gender expectations, yes, but she proved that a woman could fulfill traditionally male roles while still being acknowledged as a woman. This is relevant to ongoing debates about women in leadership today. Fourth, Hatshepsut's achievements show us that peace and prosperity can be as impressive as military conquest. History tends to celebrate warrior kings, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon. But Hatshepsut's peaceful, prosperous reign had lasting impact. Her trade networks persisted. Her buildings still stand. Her administrative reforms influenced Egyptian governance for generations. Perhaps we should reconsider how we measure historical greatness. Let's return to Deir el-Bahari, Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, because it remains her most powerful statement to history. Today, visitors can walk through this temple and see the story Hatshepsut wanted told. Despite the attempts to erase her, enough remains to understand her vision. The temple sits in a natural amphitheater of cliffs, the Theban mountains rising dramatically behind it. The approach is up a long causeway that would have been lined with sphinxes bearing Hatshepsut's features. Female face on a lion's body, combining femininity with strength. As you climb the terraces, the narrative unfolds. The lower terrace shows everyday life. Offerings, crafts, the functioning of Egyptian society under Hatshepsut's rule. The middle terrace presents the two justifications for her rule. Divine birth on one side, earthly achievement, the Punt expedition, on the other. The upper terrace, Cut into the cliff itself is where she communed with the gods. What's remarkable is how the temple uses space to create experience. As you move upward, you move from the human world toward the divine. The temple literally elevates the visitor, creating a sense of approaching the sacred. This was intentional. Hatshepsut wanted people to feel that her rule bridged earth and heaven. Even with the defacement, even with her images destroyed and her names chiseled away, the temple's power remains. You can still read the Punt expedition reliefs and marvel at ancient Egypt's reach. You can still see the divine birth narrative and understand the theology of pharaonic power. You can still appreciate the architectural genius of fitting such a monumental structure into this dramatic landscape. The temple refuses to let Hatshepsut be completely erased. And that's perhaps the ultimate irony. The people who tried to remove her from history ensured that archaeologists would find her story fascinating. The gaps in the record, the defaced statues, the chiseled-out names, all of these became clues that led scholars to reconstruct who she was and what she achieved. By trying to erase her, they made her unforgettable. Recent archaeological work continues to reveal new aspects of Hatshepsut's reign. In 2012, excavations at Karnak uncovered a cache of stone blocks from a building erected by Hatshepsut, but later dismantled. The blocks had been reused as fill in later construction, which is why they survived. These blocks show scenes of Hatshepsut performing rituals and making offerings. But what's interesting is the craftsmanship. The carving is extraordinarily fine, suggesting that Hatshepsut employed the best artisans in Egypt. Every detail was perfect, because every detail mattered. These images would last for eternity, communicating her legitimacy to future generations. In 2014, analysis of wine jar labels from Hatshepsut's reign revealed details about her administration. The labels show an extremely well-organized bureaucracy, tracking production from specific vineyards, shipping dates, and quality grades. This might seem trivial, but it demonstrates the level of administrative sophistication during her reign. Egypt under Hatshepsut was efficiently managed. In 2017, new analysis of the Punt expedition reliefs, using enhanced imaging technology, revealed details that had been missed for over a century. Researchers discovered that the expedition included diplomats and scribes in addition to sailors and soldiers. This was a sophisticated diplomatic mission, not just a trading voyage. Hatshepsut was establishing formal relations with Punt, creating agreements that would benefit both nations. Even the plants she brought back weren't random exotic curiosities. They were carefully selected species with medicinal, religious, and economic value. These ongoing discoveries continue to enrich our understanding of Hatshepsut's reign, revealing a ruler of remarkable vision and capability. One of the most intriguing questions about Hatshepsut is what she was like as a person. Beyond the propaganda and monuments, who was this woman? We can piece together some answers from the historical record. Ancient texts suggest she was charismatic and persuasive. She had to be. You don't convince an entire nation to accept an unprecedented female pharaoh without extraordinary personal force. Officials who served under her father and husband chose to serve her as pharaoh. This suggests she had earned their respect and loyalty through competence, not just birthright. She appears to have been deeply religious, or at least understood the importance of religious legitimacy. Her generous patronage of temples, particularly those dedicated to Amun, wasn't just political calculation. The level of detail in religious rituals depicted in her monuments suggests genuine engagement with theology. She was certainly intelligent and well-educated. Her inscriptions show sophisticated use of language and historical precedent. She understood how to craft narratives that justified her rule while acknowledging the unprecedented nature of her position. Her relationship with Senenmut suggests she was capable of deep personal bonds. Whether they were lovers or not, the level of trust she placed in him, allowing him privileges unprecedented for a commoner, indicates she valued loyalty and competence over traditional hierarchies. But she must have also been ruthless. You don't sideline the legitimate heir and seize power without being willing to do whatever is necessary to maintain that power. Young Thutmose III was kept carefully controlled for over 20 years. This required constant vigilance and probably the elimination of potential supporters who might challenge her. She must have also been lonely. A burden of being the only woman to ever rule as pharaoh, of constantly having to prove her legitimacy, of knowing that tradition and precedent were against her. This would have been psychologically exhausting. She had no role models to emulate, no other women pharaohs to show the way. She had to invent this role as she went, knowing that any mistake could be used to prove that women couldn't be pharaohs after all. As we approach the end of Hatshepsut's story, let's consider what happened to the other people in her life. Senenmut, her closest advisor, disappeared from the record around year 16 of her reign. His tomb was never finished. His name was later erased from many monuments, just as Hatshepsut's was. This parallel erasure suggests his fate was tied to hers. Perhaps he fell from favor before Hatshepsut's death. Perhaps he died naturally, but his association with her controversial reign made him a target for later erasure. We'll never know for certain. Neferur, Hatshepsut's daughter by Thutmose II, was groomed for an important role. She was given the title God's Wife of Amun while still a child, a position that would have made her one of the most powerful women in Egypt. She was tutored by Senenmut and appears frequently in inscriptions and reliefs alongside her mother. But like Senenmut, she disappears from the record partway through Hatshepsut's reign. She probably died young, perhaps in childbirth or from disease. If she had lived, the succession might have been very different. Thutmose III, the patient prince, finally became sole pharaoh when Hatshepsut died. For 20 years after her death, he honored her memory, or at least didn't actively dishonor it. Then came the erasure. But Thutmose III also became one of Egypt's greatest military pharaohs. He launched over a dozen campaigns into Syria-Palestine, extending Egyptian control further than ever before. He fought the Battle of Megiddo, one of the first battles recorded in detail in human history. Was his military success compensation for the decades spent sidelined? Was he proving he was a real pharaoh in ways Hatshepsut, with her focus on peace and trade, was not? Or was he simply doing what he had been trained to do, lead armies and expand empire? We can only speculate. What we know is that Thutmose III became a legendary warrior pharaoh, but his reign was built on the stable, prosperous foundation Hatshepsut had created. Her peaceful, prosperous reign filled the treasury and stabilized the administration. This allowed Thutmose III to spend lavishly on military campaigns. In a sense, her legacy enabled his. Today, Hatshepsut stands as a powerful symbol of what's possible when ambition meets opportunity, when intelligence meets courage, when someone refuses to accept the limitations society places on them. Her story resonates across 3.5 millennia because it addresses questions that remain urgent today. Can women lead as effectively as men? Her reign proves they can. Must leaders conform to traditional gender roles to be effective? Her gender-fluid presentation suggests they need not. Can historical erasure ever be complete? Her rediscovery proves it cannot. Truth has a way of emerging eventually. Who writes history and whose stories get told? Her erasure and recovery force us to ask these questions. Hatshepsut's monuments still stand in Egypt. Deir el-Bahari still draws thousands of visitors who climb its terraces and marvel at what one woman built. Her obelisk still rises at Karnak, even though it was hidden behind walls for centuries. Her name has been restored to many of the inscriptions from which it was chiseled away. She has, in the most literal sense, defied being erased. When you visit Egypt today and see her temple, remember what it represents. It's not just an architectural marvel, though it is that. It's not just a testament to ancient Egyptian engineering, though it is that too. It's proof that power once claimed leaves traces that can never be entirely removed. It's evidence that a woman, 3,500 years ago, saw a throne and decided it should be hers. And for 22 years, she made the world accept that decision. They tried to erase her. They failed. Hatshepsut was Pharaoh. She ruled Egypt through one of its most prosperous periods. She expanded trade, built monuments, maintained peace, and left a legacy that survived every attempt to destroy it. She was forgotten for 3,000 years, but she is forgotten no longer. And that, perhaps, is the greatest defiance of all. To be erased and to come back anyway. To be written out of history and to be written back in. To be silenced and to speak again across the centuries. Hatshepsut's voice echoes still from the stones of Deir el-Bahari. I was Pharaoh. I ruled. I built. I mattered. And you cannot erase me.